Good morning, everyone. We're going to talk very briefly about medical events and just exactly what qualifies as a medical event. It's important to know what rises to the level of a defined medical event versus just a deviation in therapy. Um, so a lot of these regulations stem from that one Riverside Hospital event that we discussed. It was a cobalt teletherapy machine that had not been regularly calibrated. The physicist in charge of calibration had just been decaying the machine rather than actually measuring the output of it, and he made an error in measuring the decay because of the type of graph paper that he used. He was using linear paper, continuing a decay curve that a previous physicist had been doing on Semilog, and we discussed how that can over time cause greater and greater deviations from the actual output of the machine. It prematurely decays it, so you think one output is coming out, but in reality, it's a much stronger output. And this led to an overdose of over 400 patients, some with pretty serious consequences, more towards the tail end of that period. So this spurred some call for regulation. And one of the things that happened was they defined this medical event and how it is something that deviates from your planned therapy, your planned dose by more than 10%. They wanted to make that reportable. We'll get into exactly what is defined as a reportable medical event versus a recordable. So one of them you write down and keep for your own records. One of them you have to involve your regulator. So one of the big things about this event, the Riverside event, that made it so bad was there was an effort after the fact to conceal the degree of things that happened. The physicist that had made errors in calculating the decay actually went back and forged direct measurements of the machines, backing up what he had said. But when outside consultants came in, they realized that these measurements were just too exact. Again, we talk about radiation measurements and how there's a lot of fluctuation. You know, you're not going to get exact measurements. You do the best you can. So when a measurement looks just too exact over a long period of time, that brought some suspicion, and under questioning, the physicist admitted that he was just trying to cover his butt, and he ended up getting a lot more trouble. The RSO facility was involved in it. There was a lot of trouble. These people lost their licenses. They essentially destroyed their ability to work because of this. So really the big takeaway is that it's hard to, but definitely in your best interest to report and own up to a mistake. If it happens, you will have a better outcome in that situation. And in the long term, it's definitely the right move. So for our specific situation in New York City, our main regulator is the city. We have our human use license, our non-human use license, our LINAC registration, all of our X-ray registrations come from the New York City Department of Mental Health and Hygiene, Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. So that's who is our immediate regulator. That's who inspects our facilities. That's who we report to when we have issues. So we need to have some sort of standard against which this medical event could be defined. And that's what's known as the written directive. So the written directive is essentially just a prescription that an authorized user is another definition. That is someone who is under your license or under your registrations, qualified to write these prescriptions, qualified to deliver this dose, or to dictate that this dose needs to be delivered. So there's a whole background of training and experience that they need to prove in order to be designated an AU on a license. But this AU can then write these prescriptions or these written directives for therapy. And it's supposed to contain the name of the patient, the dose, where you want it to go, how you're going to get it there, and it needs to be signed and dated. That is the official record of what you plan to deliver, and that's against which the actual delivery of dose will be compared. There are some ways to sort of manipulate the written directive in real time. Regulators do acknowledge that under certain situations, you can have an emerging situation where you decide to actively change the dose delivery in the process. It's not common, but there are situations like we have a therapy where you're delivering a very small volume of radioactive material directly to a patient's liver. However, you can hit what they call as stasis, where you can't push any more material into a confined area. And so that is commonly a source of underdosing. If you can't push any more radioactive material there, you are not going to hit your targeted dose. And the regulators understand this, and they allow you to say that you hit stasis, or you hit a point where you cannot safely apply any more pressure to the lines to get this material in there. And that's one situation where you actually don't have to report it. You record it, but you don't have to report it to the city. There are other situations in OR cases. We do a lot of prostate seed implants. There are situations where they will manipulate the placement of the seeds in real time, just because a shift in the patient's anatomy. There's other reasons, but that's one of those situations you'll see defined here, where there can be an oral directive that then must be committed to paper and signed within 48 hours after the change. So this does happen, but it's not something you want to, fall back on to try to cover for a mistake. That is something that will be found out as well. So that leads us to the formal definition of a medical event. So that is any sort of therapy, whether it's external beam or a radio pharmaceutical therapy, that it goes to a different person. It goes by a different route of administration than you anticipated. If you treat a different part of the body, you treat with a different isotope, a different source than expected. For diagnostic therapies, it also needs to be plus or minus 50% of the anticipated dose. And for therapy, it's plus or minus 10% of the dose, or plus or minus 50% of any one fraction. That is what needs to happen for it to be considered a medical event. That is just something that whether it needs to be reported or not is different than if it needs to just be actually defined as a medical event, that something essentially went wrong. So when you have to report these medical events, that's generally a medical event that has risen a little higher in terms of severity. So for reporting requirements, you'll see that it has a lot of the same criteria, different person, all that, but there's also a dose threshold that needs to be met. You need to also have over 50 rem delivered to an organ, or over 5 rem delivered to the whole body. So for diagnostic, you see the same requirements. A lot of times, small deviations in diagnostic dosing does not rise to the level of giving this much dose. But for therapies, if you have a large enough error, then it is very possible that you will deliver more than 50 rem to an organ that you did not intend, or more than 5 rem whole body because of an error. And that would be something that would be reported. So for reporting, you'll see that it's plus or minus 20% compared to the prescription. So that you have that medical event is 10%. To report the medical event, it needs to be greater or less than 20%. So that's that difference between reportable versus recordable. Recordable being you write it down, put it in file. Reportable, you get on the phone and you call your regulator and let them know something happened. And there's a lot of time limits on some of these reports. You have to either, if it's a bad enough issue, you have to report it immediately. Or you might have a 30-day limit, you might have a 24-hour call, or you might have a 30-day call. So again, that's generally how much of an error dictates how quickly you need to let the city know. Besides the city, the patient needs to be notified. That's usually on the physician to do so. And you report to the city, describe the event and the actions that you're going to take to make sure it doesn't happen again. So we're not alone in issues. We've definitely had to report things. A lot of times it's small things like missing seeds, but there are times where it's overexposures that may or may not cause harm to the patient. You'll see that a lot of these events, they get posted on the NRC website, I guess for other people to learn from, but you can see a lot of what's happening in other facilities. And almost always you'll see something like the agency plans to perform a special inspection. Pretty much the first thing you can expect when you read a report is that the city is going to come in and inspect you. And that's, it's understandable. You're admitting that you did something wrong, so they want to come in and see what's going on. But when it comes down to, our number one report is a missing seed. A seed goes missing. It happens. You're dealing with multiple patients a week, each patient getting anywhere from 50 to 100 seeds. You have other procedures that are also using seeds. So these seeds go missing. For example, our RSL program, that's a breast seed localization program where they put a little radioactive seed in the breast and then it's removed a couple of days later in the OR. We've done probably over 3,000 of these cases now. I think we've lost maybe 3 or 4 seeds in that entire process. That's a pretty good track record. Still, when you lose a seed, you can be sure that the inspector is going to come in and they're going to review your entire program. And that's the nature of regulator or regulatee relationship, I guess. But it shouldn't stop you from making that report. You know that you still have to do it, and it is the prudent thing to do. This is an example of an RSL seed going missing. This is something that we're familiar with and we have dealt with. So that's really it. Really, the takeaway is just to understand what rises to the level of medical event and where it rises to the level of actually having to report it to your regulator, which we'll go over in person. See you guys on Thursday.